Chapter 7. The Demise of the 70s. Scriptural and Early History. The calling and mission of the 70 is unique. They have been associated with the mission of nearly all the chosen servants of God. Scripturally, they are first mentioned among the ancient Israelites at the time of Moses. And the Lord said unto Moses, Gather unto me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom thou knowest to be the elders of the people, and officers over them, and bring them unto the tabernacle of the congregation, that they may stand there with thee. And I will come down and talk with thee there. And I will take of the Spirit which is upon thee, and will put it upon them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with thee, that thou bear it not thyself alone. Num. 11:16-17. And Moses went out, and told the people the words of the Lord, and gathered 70 men of the elders of the people, and set them round about the tabernacle. And the Lord came down in a cloud, and spake unto him, and took of the Spirit that was upon him, and gave it unto the 70 elders. And it came to pass, that, when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, and did not cease. Num. 11:24-25. Referring to these passages in Numbers, B.H. Roberts, president of the 70s, explained. It is fairly safe to conclude that the 70 elders of the two passages in question were really a quorum of the 70 as we know it. 70s Course in Theology, first year, page 5. Erwin S. Wells also spoke about these early 70s. The order of the 70 is doubtless of ancient origin, as we may naturally conclude from the writings of Moses. X. 24:1, 9, 11, and Num. 11:16, 17, 24, 25. These references to the 70, however, although very significant, are nevertheless so meager that we find difficulty in determining the nature of their duties, or in connecting them with the subsequent organizations of that body, either in the meridian of time or in this latter-day dispensation. This much, however, is certain, that their calling was of high spiritual importance in the work of God. Imp. Here, April 1930, page 403. Jesus established his church with a council of 70, and gave them power in the ministry. When they returned from their missionary activities, they reported astounding success. And the 70 returned again with joy, saying, Lord, even the devils are subject unto us through thy name. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy. And nothing shall by any means hurt you. Luke 10:17, 19. In our own dispensation, the Lord again designated a quorum of men to be 70s. It was established in 1835, just 2 weeks after 12 men were called to be apostles. B.H. Roberts records Joseph Smith's description of that occasion. On the 28th of February, the church and council assembled, commenced selecting certain individuals to be 70s, from the number of those who went up to Zion with me in the camp. DHC 2201. B.H. Roberts' explanation of how Joseph Smith set up the 70s in church government could be graphically represented as follows. First Presidency. Legislative. Judicial. Executive. High Priests 12 Apostles. Elders the 70. Stakes Foreign Missions. Wards Branches. The calling and office of the 70 was not only an important part of church organization, but an organizational part of the Melchizedek priesthood. According to Bruce R. McConkie, one of the ordained offices in the Melchizedek priesthood is that of a 70. Mormon Doc. Page 707. Called by revelation. The selecting of the 12 and the 70 was done by revelation. It was the fulfilling of a vision which the prophet Joseph Smith had, and undoubtedly is the one mentioned in section 107 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which states, and it is according to the vision showing the order of the 70, that they should have 7 presidents to preside over them, chosen out of the number of the 70. D&C 107-93. These groups of men had not only been seen in vision, but God had specifically called for the organization to be established, and gave all of the particulars on how it should function. President Smith then stated that the meeting had been called because God had commanded it, and it was made known to him by vision and by the Holy Spirit. DHC 2182. The prophet Joseph said to those men assembled, He, God, could not organize his kingdom with 12 men to open the gospel door to the nations of the earth, and with 70 men under their direction to follow in their tracks, unless he took them from a body of men who had offered their lives, and who had made as great a sacrifice as did Abraham. Now the Lord has got his 12 and his 70, and there will be other quorums of 70s called, who will make the sacrifice, and those who have not made their sacrifices and their offerings now, will make them hereafter. DHC 2182, footnote. So these offices and callings were given by way of revelation, and were appointed by the Lord as an important and lasting part of the church organization. Joseph Smith said, To begin the organization of the first quorum of 70s, according to the visions and revelations which I here received. The 70s are to constitute traveling quorums, to go into all the earth, whithersoever the 12 apostles shall call them. DHC 2202. Ministers of the Gospel. Regarding the office and responsibility of the 70, men called to hold the church and priesthood position, are ordained to that office, not set apart to it. Hence, every man who is ordained a 70 has the calling to act as a missionary, for the Lord clearly outlined the duty of the 70 as being ministers of the gospel to the nations. The quorum of 70s, which quorum is instituted for traveling elders to bear record of my name in all the world, wherever the traveling high council, mine apostles, shall send them to prepare way before my face. D&C 124 138-39. Joseph F. Smith made this exhortation to the saints in 1905. Gather in the strong, the vigorous, the young, the able-bodied, who have the spirit of the gospel in their hearts, to fill up the ranks of the 70s, that we may have ministers to preach the gospel to the world. October. Conf. Rep. 1905, page 96. For over 50 years the 70s carried the burden of the call as missionaries abroad. Of the total number of missionaries, the percentage of 70s responding to missionary work continued to rise until the turn of the century. However, after 1900, the percentage of 70s on missions dropped considerably. From then on, the 70s were never again to reach even one-third of the missionary force. The following figures show the decline of the 70s in foreign missions after 1900. 1900, 92%. 1905, 27%. 1910, 19%. 1915, 17%. 1920, 12%. 1925, 9%. 1930, 8%. 1935, 11%. 1940, 27%. 1945, 9%. 1950, 7%. 1970, less than 1%. Taken from unpublished MSS. The Role and Function of the 70s in LDS History by James N. Baumgarten. The Lord has clarified, however, that it was not the responsibility of those in other priesthood offices to take the gospel to other nations. It is the duty of the traveling high council to call upon the 70, when they need assistance, to fill the several calls for preaching and administering the gospel, instead of any others. D&C 107-38. Whereas other officers of the church, who belong not unto the 12, neither to the 70, are not under the responsibility to travel among all nations. D&C 107-96. 70s as apostles. The office and calling of the 70 are very similar to those of the 12 apostles. In fact, they were once called apostles. The prophet Joseph referred to them in that terminology in December of 1835. This day the council of the 70 met to tender an account of their travels and ministry, since they were ordained to that apostleship. DHC 2346. Later, when the Kirtland Temple was dedicated, the prophet arose and said, I next called upon the quorums and congregation of saints to acknowledge the presidents of 70s, who act as their representatives, as apostles and special witnesses to the nations, to assist the 12 in opening the gospel kingdom among all the people, and to uphold them by their prayers, which they did by rising. DHC 2418. Because of the similarity in the calling and mission of the 12 apostles and the 70 apostles, the distinction between the two councils should be almost indiscernible. They are both called as ministers of the gospel, and as witnesses of Jesus Christ. In fact, the 70s are conferred with the same powers, authority and keys. In referring to this memorable period, 1835, the prophet Joseph gave him, referring to Joseph Young, the first intimation of his call to the sacred office by saying, The Lord has made you president of the 70s, and further refers to his ordination in his writing. Prior to his ordination, the prophet instructed his counselor, Sidney Rigdon, to confer upon him all the priesthood, powers, blessings, keys and authority that they themselves possessed, which was strictly observed. This was on the 28th day of February 1835, which position of president of all the 70s he held until the day of his death. Taken from 70s Minute Book No. 1, page 281, Minutes by Robert Campbell, Church Historian's Office. On January 25, 1846, Parley P. Pratt conversed with some brethren in the celestial room of the Nauvoo Temple on the subject of authority and priesthood. He gave the following counsel. In case the quorum of the 12 should by any means become disorganized, that the 70s held the jurisdiction and authority of presidency of the church in all the world, wherever it might be found. Nauvoo Record Book B, page 276. B. H. Roberts clearly explained the equality of authority held by the three highest priesthood quorums in the church. The quorum of the 12 apostles are equal in power and authority to the first presidency. The first quorum of the 70 is equal in authority to the quorum of the 12, and, of course, indirectly equal in authority to the first presidency, since things equal to a common thing must be equal to each other. CHC 2369. Roberts goes on to explain that this authority would not be used by the last two quorums mentioned, unless the first quorum was for some reason disorganized, but these powers of the presidency without diminution would be exercised by the quorum of the 12 or the 70, should occasion arise for it. Ibid. 2370. The 70 and High Priest Controversy. Even in the days of Joseph Smith, problems arose over the difference in authority between the 70 and the High Priest. Brigham Young tried to clarify. That the 70s are ordained apostles, and when they go forth into the ministry, they are sent with power to build up the kingdom in all the world, and consequently have power to ordain high priests, and also to ordain and organize a high council. Some of the high priests have been ready to quarrel on the subject, supposing that they had power and authority above the 70s, and some in their zeal for power have abused and trampled on the feelings of some of the 70s. History of Brigham Young Manuscript, December 14, 1845. Years later, President Brigham Young continued to support these views. What ordination should a man receive to possess all the keys and powers of the holy priesthood that were delivered to the sons of Adam? He should be ordained an apostle of Jesus Christ. You read in the Revelation alluded to that when the 12 were called and ordained, they possessed the same power and authority as the 3 first presidents, and in reading further you find that there must needs be appendages and helps growing out of this priesthood. The 70s possess the same power and authority. They hold the keys of establishing, building up, regulating, ordaining, and setting in order the kingdom of God and all its perfections upon the earth. JD 987-88. However, these conflicts in the calling and authority of the 70s continued. By 1926, high priests were more and more frequently being called to do the work of the 70s. Heber J. Grant and some of the 12 apostles decided to change the jurisdiction of the high priests over all the 70s. They held the opinion that the 70s did not hold enough authority to ordain high priests, patriarchs, and set apart bishops, stake presidents, or to organize wards. 1. H. Roberts jumped into the defense of the 70s and wrote a long letter to President Grant and the 12 concerning this issue. He quoted many scriptural references and also related how those same problems had been resolved by the prophet Joseph and Brigham Young. His objections held off any administrative action for several years. Then in 1941, John A. Woodsoe announced, "The expanding church has made it difficult, if not impossible, for the council of the 12 to perform, to their full satisfaction, the many duties placed upon them." Therefore, at the late General Conference 5 men, high priests, were called to act as assistants to the 12. This action shows the adaptability of the church to changing, increasing conditions, without violating in the least the divinely established order and organization of the church. Imp. Here, May 1941, page 288. By October of that year, all of the assistants to the 12 were high priests. 20 years later, another change was to get newspaper attention. The 7 presidents of 70s were to become high priests. This change gave the inference that a 70 who is ordained a high priest is being advanced. The members of the first council of the 70 are now given the authority of high priests to set in order all things pertaining to the stakes and the wards, under the direction of the 12 apostles. Conf. Rep. September-October, 1961, page 90. But keep in mind what the Lord had said previously. And it is according to the vision showing the order of the 70, that they should have 7 presidents to preside over them, chosen out of the number of the 70. D&C 107-93. And the prophet Joseph had said, "The 70s are to be taken from the quorum of elders, and are not to be high priests." TPJS, page 112. Under state control. After 1936, the entire program was changed, and the 70s were organized into separate quorums with state control. The supervision of the 70s, under direction of a state committee, relates exclusively to local activities in stakes and wards, and comes rightly under their supervision, whatever plan may be adopted to make their work more effective, and does not in any way conflict with the present system of supervision of the 70s by the First Council, in collaboration with the presidents of stakes. Imp. Here, XLI, January 1938, page 38. It seems rather amusing how such changes are made in the structure of church organization, with the immediate justification that it does not in any way conflict with the present supervision of the 70s. The 70s were, of course, gradually relieved of their responsibility to the nations, and confined to the stakes. This was finally confirmed by Apostle Woodsoe. The activities of 70s resident in the stakes, both as to quorum and individuals, are under the supervision of stake presidents and ward bishops. Priesthood and Church Government, page 275. Thus, the 70s quorums were no longer part of the ministry, but another stake quorum, acting as almost a junior elders quorum. Then in April 1974, the church announced that stake presidents would now have authority to ordain and set apart 70s. Spencer Kimball stated that, This should cause the 70s to look to the stake presidents for leadership, and cause stake presidents to give more effective direction to the work of the 70s. Ultimate dissolution. When the 70s were sent back into the stakes and put under state control, there was very little for them to do. This resulted in the idea that they were not needed. So, on October 4, 1986, the church announced their decision to disband the 70s in the church. The next day, the coup de grace was announced publicly in the media. Copy of article from Salt Lake Tribune. When the 7 presidents of the 70s were all made high priests and future ordinations of 70s were discontinued, one wonders why they are still called the first and second quorum of 70s. Maybe they should be called the first and second quorum of high priests, since the title of 70 is, in reality, a memory of the past. The Lord himself had designated that the labors of the 70 should be whithersoever he himself would come. Thus they were called to one of the highest appointments ever committed to mortal men. Only a few men still have that ordination. To summarize. 1. Anciently and at the time of Christ, the work of the ministry was designated to the 70. 2. The prophet Joseph Smith restored the calling and ministry of the 70 by revelation. 3. The 70 was recognized as an office in both the church and the Melchizedek priesthood. 4. The 70 were acknowledged as a quorum of apostles, and given the same authority, calling and keys as the 12. 5. By the turn of the century, the church began to send elders and high priests as missionaries instead of the 70s. 6. Later the church called on high priests as assistants to the 12, and the 2 quorums of 7 presidents of 70s were made high priests. 7. The 70s were put under state control, with little to do in the ministry. 8. Finally the office 70 in the church was totally disbanded.